The company, and then I'll give you an opportunity to respond. The company is registered to a political operative in Virginia. Do you know, just by way of example, whether this company that received $143 million in taxpayer dollars, has it ever done work for the government before?
I don't know. I can't.
The answer is it has not. And do you know why we know that? Because it was incorporated 8 days before this contract went out. You want the American people to believe that this is all above board?
Yes,
that $143 million of taxpayer money just happened to go to this one company?
Before we even start this breakdown, you need to see what kind of collision course this hearing is on. Because in just a moment, Congressman Joe Neguse corners Governor Kristi Noem with a series of questions she can't cleanly escape. And the way she reacts sets the tone for everything that follows. Today's video is about a very simple question. What happens when a top Trump-aligned official walks into a committee room thinking she'll run the clock, and instead gets pinned down on her own contradictions? Watch closely, because this isn't one of those hearings where everyone politely tiptoes around the obvious. Neguse goes straight for the weak spot: a $220 million ad campaign, a no-bid process, and a contractor that barely seems to exist. Here's the stakes. We're talking about taxpayer money, 9 figures of it, flowing to a company with no website, no clear headquarters, and no government experience. That was incorporated just 8 days before it landed a $143 million federal award. That's the sort of detail that makes a hearing instantly combustible. Because once that fact is on the table, the room shifts. Noem goes from presenting leadership to defending something that looks like a political favor wearing a federal contract. And Joe Neguse? He senses the opening. From this point forward, he's not just asking questions. He's testing how far she's willing to go to protect a story that's already unraveling. And here's the thing. The moment...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Madam Secretary. Thank you for being here. I want to discuss in greater detail the expansion of advertising in your department under your tenure. And I believe you testified regarding some of these matters yesterday in front of the United States Senate. In particular, I want to discuss the department's $220 million ad campaign. This is the ad campaign that featured you at Mount Rushmore. You're familiar with this ad campaign, correct?
I am familiar with it. It was an ad campaign that was...
I'm going to ask you some questions about it, Madam Secretary. So, as I understand it, this is a $220 million ad campaign. It's split between 2 contractors. One of those contractors got $143 million. That contractor is called Safe America Media, correct?
Correct.
Okay. That company is affiliated with a former political director of the National Republican Congressional Committee. Now, yesterday you testified, I think I'm quoting you right, you said, quote, or in reference to this contract, that, quote, it went out to a competitive bid. Do you stand by that statement?
It was a no-bid contract where 2 vendors were...
It was a no-bid
chosen.
contract.
If it would have been a no-bid contract, if I'm using that correctly, it goes out to 2 different vendors.
Correct. So it was not a competitive... Let me try to explain what the discrepancy, because a competitive bid is very different than a no competitive bid. And I'll just explain why. We know that your testimony yesterday, when you said, again, I'll quote, it went out to a competitive bid, is untrue. The reason we know it's untrue is because under federal law, your agency is required, whenever the agency decides to skip competitive bidding, to file a notice with the public explaining why. And in this case, your agency filed a notice. You're aware of that, right? Justification and approval for other than full and open competition. Your agency made a decision not to proceed with competitive bidding, and one of the contractors that got the award was this Safe America Media Company that received $143 million.
Many vendors.
Okay, let's pause here. Because what you just watched is the turn. The moment Neguse locks in on one very specific contradiction and refuses to let it drift into political spin. Noem said, under oath the day before, that the massive DHS ad contract went out to a competitive bid. Today, under pressure, she backtracks and admits it was a no-bid contract. That shift alone would shake up any hearing, but look at how Neguse handles it. Watch his pacing. He doesn't jump to accusation. He walks her straight into her own contradiction by using her own words. And that's why she suddenly shifts from confident explanations to trying to redefine terminology, talking about how 2 vendors were invited, and getting tangled up in her own distinction between competitive and no competitive. This is where you see the control slide. Her explanation isn't clarifying, it's scrambling. She tries to describe a process as competitive after admitting it wasn't competitive. Then comes the next blow, federal law. Neguse cites the exact notice DAs had to file, the justification required whenever an agency skips competitive bidding. And the way he phrases it is important. He says we know it's untrue, not as a personal attack, but because DEX itself documented the decision to sidestep an open bidding process. That's when the questions get sharper. Where's this company headquartered? Has it ever worked for the government before? How long had it even existed before the contract was awarded? And Noem, the governor who brands herself as deeply involved, deeply informed, and fiercely in control, answers again and again. I don't know. I don't know. I can't. You can feel the tension tighten with each answer. Because every I don't know lands right next to a glaring fact Neguse has lined up. And the most damaging one, that the company was incorporated just 8 days before receiving a $143 million award. That is the kind of detail that absolutely detonates in a committee room. It doesn't require interpretation. It doesn't require political framing. It's just numbers on paper. Numbers that make the contract look like it was built backward from a predetermined outcome. Notice, too, that Noem keeps trying to defend the program's effectivenesses, saying it reached billions of impressions, saying it was spent across multiple countries, but none of that actually addresses the core issue. Why did a politically connected, newly created company receive a massive federal contract without a competitive process? Neguse doesn't let her pivot to outcomes. He keeps bringing her back to origin. The bidding process, the missing headquarters, the non-existent website, the timing of incorporation, the political operative address. This is where the momentum becomes impossible to ignore. Noem is answering the questions technically, but she's not defending the process, she's defending the narrative around it. There's a difference. And even before we get to the next clip, you can feel where this is headed. Because instead of calming the concerns, her answers are raising more of them.
$3 million.
Many
right?
vendors got the chance to look at that contract and to participate in it.
Well,
so that is why the 2 of them were chosen.
That's inaccurate, Madam Secretary. I'll read from the notice from your agency. Given the immediate action to significantly reduce illegal immigration and border crossings, DHS identified 4 companies. 4 of the hundreds of thousands of companies in the United States. You identified 4. One of those is this Safe America Media company. Where is Safe America Media headquartered?
I don't know.
I don't know either, Madam Secretary. We can't find it. We can't find a website. We did find an address that's registered for this company. Do you know where that address is?
Is there a problem with this contract?
I'll tell you about it.
According to
Madam
law,
Secretary, the
address
is registered to a political operative. Madam Secretary, the company, and then I'll give you an opportunity to respond. The company is registered to a political operative in Virginia. Do you know, just by way of example, whether this company that received $143 million in taxpayer dollars, has it ever done work for the government before?
I don't know. I can't.
The answer is it has not. And do you know why we know that? Because it was incorporated 8 days. 8 days before this contract went out. You want the American people to believe that this is all above board?
Yes,
that $143 million of taxpayer money just happened to go to this one company that doesn't have a headquarters, doesn't have a website, has never done work for the federal government before, and is registered apparently or attached to a residence from a political operative. And of course, one of the subcontractors of that contract, as you know, is a political firm that's tied to you back when you were governor of South Dakota. The reason why I ask these questions is that this is taxpayer money. And I presume, I don't know this for a fact, but Senator Tillis noted yesterday the way in which your agency is blocking the Inspector General from 11 different investigations that it is trying to conduct. I don't know if this happens to be one of them. I certainly hope it is, because eventually the facts will become public in this regard. And there are serious laws implicated, conflict of interest laws, federal procurement laws, that I believe
all
merit...
followed. All done correctly,
Was
all
it
done legally.
all done correctly?
14 billion impressions from that marketing campaign.
Sure.
It was money spent in this country and in 8 different countries that illegal migration was coming from.
Madam Secretary,
overwhelmingly effective.
We all
$49
understand the argument that you've
billion.
made, that somehow this ad campaign on Fox News of you at Mount Rushmore has led to millions of people self-deporting. You're using
why do you think
millions
that
of
they did
dollars of
self-deport?
taxpayer
Had they not known?
money in this way. It is fraud, and ultimately, I think there's going to be accountability. And I yield back, Madam.
Can I speak to the IG?
Yes, you can. Quick.
The IG has been told repeatedly, in writing, verbally, on the phone, that he can have access to anything at the Department of Homeland Security. He can. He doesn't need my permission to come and brief members of Congress on the Hill. He just needs to provide a scoping memo, which is what every single IG gets from every single department and agency. All intelligence agencies require a scoping memo. He just hasn't done.
This second half is where the temperature spikes. Neguse starts stacking details so tightly that Noem barely has room to maneuver. The company can't be located. The registered address belongs to a political operative. It had 0 federal experience. It was created 8 days before the contract, and the moment he connects the dots, that's when he uses the word every official in that Chair Dread's hearing on the record. Fraud. He doesn't scream it. He doesn't overplay it. He just states it, and then immediately ties it back to procurement law and taxpayer accountability. This is the point where Noem tries to reclaim ground by offering something that sounds definitive, 14 billion impressions, overwhelmingly effective. But you can feel the mismatch. She's trying to pivot to results. He's talking about legality, process, and political conflict. Those 2 tracks never intersect, and that's why her answer lands hollow. It doesn't address the issue. It only signals that she wants to move away from the origin story of the contract entirely. And when Neguse brings up the Inspector General, noting that DHS is blocking 11 investigations, you can see Noem get even more defensive. He's not even saying this contract is one of those investigations. He's saying it should be, and that eventually the facts will come out. That's a pressure statement. It's a warning that the committee isn't done. And what does Noem do? She switches from defending the contract to accusing the IG of demanding unfettered access. She insists that he's been told repeatedly he can access anything, but frames him as failing to provide the required scoping memo. Here's why this matters. Her defense at this point isn't about the contract. It's about the process of oversight itself. That's what losing control of the narrative looks like. Instead of projecting authority, she's now explaining procedural disagreements with the watchdog meant to keep her agency accountable. This is where viewers need to pay attention. Because when an official starts shifting the issue away from the contract and onto the oversight agency, it usually means the contract isn't the strongest ground to stand on. And remember, Neguse never raised his voice. He never made it personal. He didn't need to. He brought documents, timelines, legal requirements, and factual contradictions. And those alone did the work. Noem's responses weren't explosive, but they were revealing. She distanced herself from the contractor's basic details. She couldn't defend the timeline. She tried to redefine terms she used the day before. And she pivoted repeatedly to outcomes that didn't answer the underlying procurement questions. That's why this hearing matters, because it shows what happens when oversight isn't theater. When someone asks pointed questions, sticks to the record, and refuses to let an official spin their way out of the frame. And now let's pull back even further, because this exchange has a much larger context. Here's the bigger picture that often gets lost. Noem isn't just a random official attending a routine committee session. She's a major player in Trump-aligned politics, a national figure, and someone who has built her brand on the image of executive decisiveness. That's why this moment hits so hard. Because the very thing she prides herself on, confident leadership, tight control, disciplined execution is exactly what slips away as soon as Neguse starts pushing on the contract's paper trail. This is the type of exchange that can shift political narratives, not because of theatrics, but because it exposes gaps between rhetoric and record. And the most damaging part? She didn't deny the facts. She just couldn't defend them. When someone in her position defaults to, "I don't know. I can't say. I'm not aware," on questions involving a 9-figure contract, that's not strength. That's vulnerability, and Neguse didn't miss it. He exploited it skillfully, methodically, without ever needing to raise his volume. He let the silence between her answers do the work. By the time she pivots to the IG back and forth, the battle for narrative control is already lost. And you can feel it. Even viewers who disagree politically can sense the imbalance in the exchange. One side prepared, sourced, and focused. The other side defensive, vague, and reactive. And that's the real takeaway. This hearing wasn't about showmanship. It was about oversight and about a $143 million decision that still doesn't have a clean, transparent explanation. And if this is how the first round went, you can bet oversight committees are going to keep pulling at this thread. If you want more breakdowns like this where powerful people get pressed on the record, hit subscribe and drop your take in the comments. Who do you think came out stronger in this hearing? And what was the one moment that changed the whole exchange?